Good morning, guys. This is Eric Mwaura, and today, as you can see on our screen, we have a model of a helicopter number AWEH101. And what I want us to go through today is a tutorial on how to achieve an effect that I found very tricky and very essential to share with you about making the main rotor and the tail rotor of a helicopter to blur as they spin, and also something else we're going to see as we open the Blender file, how to make the tail rotor copy the transformations, which are the rotation of the main rotor in the respective axis. But we'll get into that in detail, don't worry as of now. So as you can see on this image here, you have the final render. It's done in Blender internal, and I'm not going to spend so much time on the modeling and the texturing and anything to do with the body. My main concern for this tutorial is the blur test and compositing, how you combine them in render layers. But probably before that, we can also go through some of other renders for this helicopter, and you can have a look at some of the renders. I've taken them from different dimensions, different perspectives to capture the details for this material, this helicopter. So you can have those several images. Each image has what it shows. This one is the texture, the UV and the texture for the entire body, and that's it. So much for that. Let's get into the work. And before probably we get to the work, I also made a small animation for this helicopter. If I play this video, you can see that sorry, why doesn't it play? Yeah, when I play this video, you can see the test I'm speaking about, the blur test for the main rotor and the tail rotor. But however, for this video, for this animation, I realized that because of the software I'm using to record, it doesn't record the main rotor spinning at full speed, and because of that, I'm going to drop a link where you can watch the video online at full speed. That's enough for the show. Now let's get to Blender, where we have the helicopter, and it's there from the right view. Looks to me it's nice. That's the right view, and then we go to the front view. Because this is a complicated mesh, I've been able to break it down into layers such that you have layer 1 where you have the main body or the main mesh for this helicopter. And if I were to go to where edit mode, you can see I've used the mirror modifier. You just spend time on this, you model a part after another until all of it is done. We got the second layer, you have the interior part. The third layer, you have the rotors. The fourth, lighting. Fifth, you got some controls there. Sixth, you got some pilots, 2 pilots here, and then you also have this one, I don't know what's there. And the next, you have the wheels and some additional lights, or the undercarriage to use the specific term. And then you have the additional lights and the rigging, the rig for the pilots. Now if I combine everything all together, it gives this EH101. Now if you press 7 on the number pad, it takes you to the top view. There is this control which I have named rotate rotors, and its work is to rotate the rotors. If I rotate, it rotates the main rotor, and if you pan around and observe its effect on the tail rotor, is that it follows on well nicely. That's what I'm going to show you. And to break that down, I'd like us to go to use a demonstration of how the main rotor is modeled and how you make the tail rotor to follow the rotation of the main rotor. I'm going to do a very quick demonstration by adding a cube here and scaling it down and then scaling it in the Y. Now I want you to assume that this cube here is going to be your blade. Yeah, so this is the blade of the helicopter. Remember, if you have observed well, we have 5 of them, but now to make the modeling work easy and fast, you don't have to keep on modeling all of those 5 because they are all the same. But what you can do something, you can model one carefully, but I'm not going to model here so carefully, it's only for a demonstration. And then after you model carefully, you use an array, which I'm going to show you right now here. Let's assume this is one of the blade. Actually, we're not assuming this is one of the blade, but for this is an example. If you rotate, it rotates around its origin. Okay. Now we want to use an array modifier for this. Before we add any array modifier, let's first apply the rotation and the scale, and then we go ahead, we take the cursor back to the selected. Come on, what's the problem with my mouse? Doesn't. Let me press Shift C. Add an empty. I'm having a problem with this mouse. I don't know, the left click doesn't work so well, but I'll get that fixed soon. Array modifier, and then you disable this relative offset, because we don't, if you increase the count to 5, you know, it only increases them in this x-axis. We don't want any of those. We are going to use an object offset and that's why we have added this empty. Use this eyedropper tool and select empty, and then they just disappeared. Actually, they have not disappeared. It's because they won't. They are now being, the array is being controlled by this object, and if I rotate, you can see that they are also rotating and making duplications of the same object. But however, because we know that there are 5 blades, and then they need to rotate at they need to cover an angle of 360 degrees. By calculation, we can come here and in Blender, and this is one of the things I love, and it's so cool with Blender. You can just do your calculations and computations inside these boxes here. So we are going to take 360 degrees divide by 5 blades, and that gives us 72 degrees, which is what we actually want. Now here we are also going to add we are going to add a circle, and this one is going to be the main control for the controller for the main rotor. Press T, and we want to in this shading, you want to flip that direction to get rid of that blackish color on that controller. You can give it any color you want. Probably you can have let's give it a material like a blue material, just so you can see it, and then you can give this controller probably a yellow material to differentiate it. And now there you have it. You select the main rotor and the empty, and finally the circle, and Control P to parent them to that circle. And if you now hold it, it carries everything along, and if you rotate, it also rotates. There's something I'd like us to do here before we go on. By matter of reasoning and understanding, because this is a main rotor for helicopter, you don't expect it to be spinning in any other axis apart from the Z axis, right? Yeah. So for this case, I'm going to lock X and Y and only rotate for the X. So you cannot rotate that blade in any other direction apart from the Z. But however, because this is because we also need a tail rotor, I'm not going to remodel a tail rotor. I'm going to select everything and duplicate, and then just move it somewhere there. And now you guess what I'm going to do is to rotate this at 90 degrees, and then it's just too big for a tail rotor. Let's just scale that down, and probably you can also move it again. Yeah, that is it. I'm happy with that rotation and scale. So we are going to apply the scale and the rotation, because we are going to use constraints later, and they are very sensitive to any unapplied rotation, scale and scale. I think we also missed out to also see which axis this one should be rotating. It should be the x, if you're rotating the x-axis. So we should actually lock y and z. I don't want to lock fast because I want to show you some very cool technique here. I realized that not all helicopters have the tail rotor perpendicular to the main rotor. Some helicopters, after you observe, as you observe, will have the rotor, the tail rotor, adjusted or set at an angle to the main rotor. I don't know any special reasons for that, but the problem comes is that if you rotate it at such a slanted angle and then you go to 3 right view and you want to make an animation of it rotating, you might be cheated from the right side as if it's rotating well, but when you go to the front view and rotating the x-axis, you see there's hellfire. It just rotates in a very unpleasant way. How do you set that? You set it very simple. You just go here to N, that is for the properties, and also and after you go there, you see this figure on this X. This is what you should be rotating, and not the X here in the in the world space. I don't know whether I should call it world space. If you rotate here in the X, because the rotation is not applied, the computer or the blender tries to search for X for this, and it can't find the X you want, and now it end up rotating everything. So if you only use this X here, that is where you can get to rotate the tail rotor the way you want, and you can also apply that rotation. And now if you rotate in X, sorry, it doesn't work, but I don't know why. But if you rotate here, oh sorry, I think you don't need to apply. You just rotate it, and you can even set a driver for that, but this tutorial is not going to show you how to make those drivers. For this tutorial also, I don't want us to work with the tail rotor when it's slanted at an angle. That was only a tip I was giving you. So let's get rid of those rotations. Let's set this combination of rotors so that when you rotate this follows on nicely. And I just forgot to lock those two because they should not rotate in any other axis apart from the x-axis. What did I just do? Let's go to the constraints panel here. We want this small circle controller for the tail rotor to copy the transformation of this controller for the main rotor, and also pay attention to the axis which they are spinning at respectively. I hope that is clear. We are going to use we are going to click on this small one, this small control for the tail rotor, and give it I said my mouse has a problem, and add a transformation constraint, and then use this eyedropper tool. Come on, you see now my mouse is having problems, and select circle. Then we are going to deal with rotations only, so select rotations for both, and then we have these two sides, or these two profiles. The first profile is information about the main rotor. The second one is information about the rotation for the tail rotor. The main rotor is rotating in the z direction, in the z-axis, and we want this to be from negative 360 all the way to 360. So a minimum of negative 360 and a maximum of 360. Then this is also very important, source to destination mapping. So these three XYZ are the axis for the source, and this one are the axis for the tail. By logic, we want the Z transformation, which is the rotation, the Z rotation of the main rotor to become the X rotation for the tail rotor. I hope I'm not confusing you. So we are going to say we want the Z to go to be the X. These others don't matter so much, but you can these don't matter so much anyway, because we only set the main rotor to rotate only on the z-axis, and now we want that to be copied in the x, so we are going to go to the x. Now for this one, we actually want this tail rotor to rotate twice the speed of the main rotor. That happens with helicopters, the way they are made. They are made in such a way that the tail rotor spins even at 3 times for some helicopters. So the tail rotor makes 3 spins for every single spin of the main rotor. So if you multiply 360 by 2, you get 720. So that's where we are, 720, and this one is 720. So I hope you understand the logic between these. The figures here and the figures here are related. So 1 is to 2 ratio. If you want 3 times, you multiply 360 by 3 and write those figures. And also remember, the negative and the positive are very essential. And now if you come here and rotate that, you can see that the helicopter is also spinning very, very, very nicely. And that is the first part, and we are done. Let's get back to the main helicopter of our tutorial, the EH101. Select all the layers, and I don't know why. Goodness. I don't want you to think that the scene is complex. No, it's actually some problems I have with this mouse. I will actually replace it very soon. This is the helicopter, and I have explained the relationship between this rotor and the tail rotor. Now next is we are going to make a small animation. Now you see, the good thing with setting that constraint is that you only need to rotate only the main rotor, and everything else follows nicely. Here we are going to select the location rotation keyframe and press this recording button to record our animation. And now we are going to start from keyframe 0, and we insert a keyframe here for Z by pressing I and hovering over this profile here. Then we're going to go to 180 degrees, and for the Z we key in a figure like 5000. We want it to rotate for 5000. If I play by pressing Alt A, you can see it's playing, but it's not playing nicely because by default the graph, if you look at the graph for this, you can see it's set to Bezier, and we want to change that from Bezier to linear by pressing T, and now it is actually in Bezier right now, and now we want to use the linear extrapolation mode. And that what it does is that it helps the rotor to spin at a constant speed all throughout the animation. Okay, so that is it. I just want us to have a simple animation like that for the rotor. Now something else, when now the rotors are spinning, let's have the scene of the helicopter hovering above the ground. Actually I have a ground here, and if I unhide it, Alt H, you can see our ground. Here it is. And if I go to the camera settings, here I have my camera. I have already set the camera and the lighting is set. So we have the blade is already spinning. Now let's start the scene with our helicopter above this ground. Now this is the main control for our helicopter, so it's the main parent. So if I grab that in the Z axis, it just lifts it up. I think that height is okay. And then we are going to rotate a bit in the X axis. Actually a helicopter, let's assume it's just about to land, or it's just hovering above the ground, and now it's just spinning the blades. By something else, by other logic, because probably the pilot is trying to balance the helicopter above the ground, and then it's a heavy thing, you realize it's not able to stick, like it's glued on the same position, so it makes some very small and slight movements. Don't make them so large, because it will appear that something is not right, or it will appear very, very light, you know, not heavy. If you make the movements to be very fast, it will appear it's very light. So I think for just slight movements, you can play around with the keyframing of that animation and have it done. This, for the sake of the tutorial, I think that will be good to go. We want now to jump right away to the compositing, and before we do that, let's give this a render, and I'm using 1280 by 720 at 100% compression. The light is set up and everything else. I'm not going to dwell so much on the lighting, but so that you can, we go back to our main render here, you realize that this glass appears to be reflecting some stuff, you know, like trees, and you can't see any trees in the scene. And this is a very handy trick to bring that sort of realism and make this glass look like glass. I have used a HDR image here, and this HDR image is now the world. Is the world for our scene, and that helps the glass to reflect as I have shown on this render image there. I'm going to give this a render right now, right away, pressing F12. Stop with this mouse. I'm telling you, I'm seeing things I have not seen. This render will take around a minute, and because of this tutorial, I don't think it's wise to actually keep you looking at this thing as. So here we are after we have rendered. It took 53 seconds, that's close to a minute, and it gave us this render. I realized later that I skipped something very essential that appears in this main model. There is this light at this front undercarriage, and you can see that I had set the light for it but never gave the material an emission. I don't think it is emitting any light so far, so it's wise to go there right now and do that. And you go to the materials. We have it should be which one should it be? It should be that glass. Yeah, this is the one we want to give a very bright material for the shading. We want it to emit some light. Let's give it 10 should be okay. And also, if you also look at this animation for this animation, there are some other lights here that are blinking. I think I can also show you how to make that if you don't know. Here at the rear we have the two lights, and now let's get there. We have that, select for the emit red material, and also for the emit white we have it there. So why don't we come here and give it an emission of 6, or let me just 4 will be fine. 4 will be fine, and also emit white 4 will be fine also. Now here what we actually do is we want it to blink, so it starts from 0, increases, and then decreases. Okay, so we actually want we are not dealing with this white one, so we want this to start at 4. It's no problem, and then stay at 4 for a very short time, probably for 4 frames. You also insert a keyframe so it remains 4 for that time, and then reduces to 0 in a very short time. That is, within 1 frame it reduces to 0. I'm saying 0, not 40, and then stays at that 0 for the rest of the frames up to 10, and then you keyframe that. Now if you jump right away to the graph editor, you can see the graph of what you have just done, and here it is. You have it starting at 0 and remaining at 4. And now for this case I want us to use the linear, so that it gives us that nice curve. That's that nice curve. If actually we were using the if we were using this constant, which is actually most suitable for digital stuff, it even gives it a very straight line, so it drops from 4 to 0 immediately. And now we can go ahead and apply a cycles modifier here. I think that's fine. That's fine. And now if you play here, you can see it's blinking. I don't know whether it's possible for you to see it blinking, but it's blinking very fast. So let's scale that in the X so that it only blinks for a shorter period. And then we just repeat what we just did to this. We go to 0, and then let it have at 4, insert at 4, and then here at 4 insert again, and then here you come and you zero that and insert, and lastly you come here and it's at 0, you insert another keyframe, then jump back to the graph editor and you only select this channel. How do you select one channel? You select one of the handles and then you press L. That select the line of that channel. That's active at the moment, and then you press T and choose constant, which should be very handy. Now you realize that as far as this is concerned, as far as the blinking is concerned, they are blinking both at the same time, and that's not what we want. We want one to blink when the other one is off, and that is capable by grabbing this in the Z axis and offsetting it a bit so that they don't remain at the same position like that. Now the rest is also repeating the same for the lights. For example, we have this red light here, and when we are starting, it starts at 0, at 4, so we actually use 4 or even 6, a higher figure, then keyframe that. If I remember, we went to this frame, so you also go to that frame and insert, and then you go to the other frame, which should be frame number what? Which frame should be this? We are here, frame number 15. Now this one drops to 0 directly, not 60 but 0, and then after that it stays at 0 up to that point there. So you have that one. We also going to repeat the same procedure very fast for this white light. That's here it's 0, and here at frame 0 it's at 6. I hope you're getting the idea. Here, is it there or where? At this frame it's at 6, so from 6 to 6, and then drops to at frame 15 it drops directly to 0 and stays 0 up to this point. I don't know, this should be 0. Why is it increasing? Why is it increasing? Yeah, I know why it's increasing. It's because we have not jumped to this channel T for constant, and then you actually add a modifier. Why can the modifier be added to a light? Let's see, for example, for this one. So select that channel L, then T constant, and add that modifier cycles. Let's get back to our white light, this one. Let's go back to the graph editor and select that one, L, and then modifier, and now that is enough for the animation of the lights, and that's okay. That's okay. So let's give it another render so that now it includes the lights. the lights. So I'm going to render the image, and even before I render the image, why don't we just go to compositing so that I can show you something that's gonna be very important. Now if we use this ancient, I don't know whether I should call it ancient, this earlier render we had done, if we were to use it for an example by using this viewer node, there's something we want on this helicopter. We want the blade to have the blur effect as it spins, and we want the lights to also give that blur, that glare image as they go on and off. To enable this and to apply it in a nice way, we are going to make use of render layers. We are going to have 2 render layers, or even 3. We are going to have 3, and let's see how we are going to do that. So we are going to hide this ground, then we are going to have this main rotor and its tail rotor, which is on number 3. So they are on scene number 3. We are going to render layers. First and foremost, we are going to have a render layer called main, which is going to have everything. By meaning everything, this render layer will include everything else apart from, we are going to have everything else on this scene apart from the main rotor, because the main rotor is going to appear on its own. I also think that for these lights, because they are going to have a different setup, we are going to disable them. And even something I didn't do is that I didn't group them so that the wheels are not in the same position. So let me select those 2 lights. Okay, let me select those 2 lights, and also let me select this other light here. Let me make it a separate object. Now if I select those and Control I to select everything else, I can now move this to the first layer and leave the lights, only the lights on that, and then I'm going to use, let me first get rid of that, deselect that. Okay, so there is this light for that red, and this light for that white, and this one for the big light at the front. Let's have those 3 lights and Control I to select everything else apart from what was selected, and also you deselect the lights because we don't want to move them, and now move those to the last layer where we have the other lightings, or the rigging and the lighting for the other stuff. So on this layer we have, let's see what I did. So on this layer here we have these lights. Let me see where we have the lights for these small bulbs. Yeah, these ones. We actually want these 2 to remain here with their lights, and also even this one to remain there. Perfect. So you have this light. I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing. Which light should control this one? Let's see. You have 3, you have 5. This is the one we want to remain here on number 3. So if you go to 3, deselect that and move it wherever it can be. Now this render layer is only for the lights. This is for the controls, and then everything else should appear on the main render like that. So for the main render, it's going to have all those. And something else you should know, I'm making a mistake, and it is a very terrible mistake. The lights, these lights, they should be everywhere, is it? Yeah, they should affect the model. You see, this light should affect the model and the objects close to it, and so if you only have them on that layer, it's not going to fit in nicely. So you are going to duplicate them and move. So we going to move, and then we press control, and then you keep on pressing. I don't know why it never did that. Let me pause this recording for a while, and then so I'm back after figuring out we want to have these lights in all the other layers, and you do that by pressing M and then Shift. Now if you click, you are going to have a duplicate of those lights, not really a duplicate, but the information of those lights in other layers too. And having said that, we are also going to have every other light. We are going to select all lights, select by type, lamp, all lamps. We are going to do the same, so that we have them actually everywhere else. You can see we have all the lights. They are in all layers, because that is very important to have them there. So that's the lights. We were here, we were in the render, in this render layers, and we were saying that the main, so you select all the layers that should have main, it should be part of the main, and that is everything else apart from the bulbs or the headlights or whatever, those blinking, and the rotors. Those are the only exception. So for this one, how these render layers work, we have these two boxes here, these first two groups of layers, and these are actually this is just the same thing. If I deselect here, it also gets deselected here. If I select, for example, here, it also gets selected here. So this first two is exactly the same thing as this. But now for this one, these other two, this one, you use them to tell Blender what to include in this scene, depending on where you click. So we want the main render layer to render everything, excluding, so let it render everything excluding what we have excluded there. In many instances you find it might be a replica of what you're doing here, but not always. So we want this, because this is the main layer, we want it to render what is found on those layers, which are these layers, regardless of where you have selected. So even if you select, for example, if you select this, which gets selected here, and then you deselect them on this second layer, it means if you render here, if you give it a render, it's going to render only these ones, because they are the rest are excluded here. But I don't want to include the main rotor. Yeah, actually we can even include them there. Let's have them there. So let's have the main render layer having everything else but gets excluded here. We also want them to create a mask, so we are going to use these two. So this layer and this layer are going to create a mask in the scene. The importance of the mask will come as we render. You're going to see what that exactly means. That is the main render layer. We are going to have another render layer, and this is going to be the rotors. Come on. For this one, we want the helicopter, or we want to select everything in the scene. So this rotor scene should render everything and then only include those two, that is, only include that layer. Okay, what did we just do? So only include that layer and then create a mask for it, And also there's this option for sky, which means for this rotors layer we want it to be transparent. We don't want any sky details on that. And then sky, and lastly you make last render. You see the problem I'm saying with this mouse of mine, it doesn't want us to record this tutorial. Lastly, you have the lights and lamps. Now what this is going to do, never space this, I don't know why again it's so lights and lamps, that is the last layer, and it will include everything in these default render layers, and only render what is found on the third. It should be the third, yes, let me check out. Yeah, it should be the third. And then create a mask for it and create a transparency, an alpha channel for that, because we don't want the sky. Now having said that, if you now give that a render, I don't think yeah, we should give it a render at this point, so that this now gets registered into Blender, such that as we jump into compositing, it's going to have that information. So just render that out, and as I said earlier, I'm not going to have you watch this render continue for a whole minute. That's so much for a tutorial. Let me just pause. So this is the render for these render layers we just created here, and as you can see, the place where the main rotor is supposed to be is actually transparent, and you can see it actually renders it as transparent because it's what we set and it's what we wanted. Also for the lights, you can see that they are also transparent. The materials, not the materials, but because we also set the ones for the light and lamps to be transparent, that's there's no sky. We disable the sky, it makes them transparent. Now as now we enter into compositing with this image, we are going to combine what we just did. So to combine them, we want to duplicate that and also duplicate it again 3 times, because you have 3 render layers. Then change this from main to rotors, and then immediately you can see, if you take this node and key it there, you can see now this where you have the render. If you press V and then alt and then you use those shortcuts, you press alt and middle mouse button to actually move it around, move that around the image still in the compositing layout. Then if you want to move it or to zoom it, you press V or alt V to zoom and unzoom. So in this render layer here, for the rotors, it actually only contains the rotors. And then lastly, if we select the last one to be the lights and lamps, there you have it. And now if you check that node, you see now it has those 3 lights, and that's what we wanted exactly. To combine these 3 layers together, because they are objects, we use an alpha over node. So don't make a mistake of using a mix node, it won't work perfectly. Then you grab that, come on, I don't know why it's lagging. Probably I should disable auto render. I have disabled that. So we are going to take this image to the first node there, and then we take this image and take it there. And if we now take this output to the viewer, we can see we have been able to combine this and that. Sometimes you can try to exchange that. I don't know how exactly they should be attached, but let's have them in the first place like that. And then also we are going to duplicate the alpha over node and then take this connection and have it there, so that we combine these three. Now you realize here at the top here, that the main rotor can be seen as whole as it is, and the problem why we have that is because I remembered that for this main rotor we actually enabled sky, and that is the problem why you can see, if we actually zoom out, you can even see it from this place, you can see that you can see the main rotor through this mesh, and that's not what we want. Now if we should disable sky there and re-render that, and I hope let me pause. I'm telling you, problems never cease. I'm back. I have seen the problem and the reason why we were not able to fix this main rotor stuff, and that actually is not because of this sky we disabled here, but it's actually because of how we selected our layers. So here for the mask layers, we should actually select the other way around. So instead of selecting those two, you deselect them and now select that everything else should be the mask for those layers. I'm sorry for making that small mistake there. So you go ahead and click everything around, and you only create a mask for that layer. You leave this layer which is selected here at the top. So that was the small mistake I had done, and that's why it appears not to be fixed. And now if we do that and now give that a render, and obviously have to pause that recording, and wow, look at that, look at just how we just fixed that. I think that's so cool and that's so good. Now because we've done that, next we'll be now adding the blur effect to the main rotor. And the reason why we separated it from the main render layer is because when the helicopter's body is moving very fast in a scene, if you add a vector blur, which we are going to add right now, it's going to blur both the body and the rotor, and that is not practical because the speed at which this rotor moves is so much compared to how the helicopter itself can travel. So because of that, we are going to enable here in the passes, by default this little thing here is usually collapsed like that, so just expand it, and by default it's not selected this for the vector. I selected this before when I was testing it, so just enable that vector, and when you enable that, it gives you a pass here for the speed, this blue speed control there, and it only appears on the render layer in which you've selected. Actually we don't want to have the speed, but we can have it for some other reason we are going to see. Let's have it on the rotors. That's where we are much more concerned with the speed and the blur and the vector blur for that. So we are going to first add the blur effect for the main rotor, and that should follow for the tail rotor because they exist in the same render layer. We are going to use a filter known as vector blur, and this what does, I think it was specifically made for helicopter blades because it just works so fine for rotating stuff. If things are rotating and you want them to blur as they rotate, it's made for that. And so we are going to use it only on the second layer, the rotors layer. We are going to have the image to the image, then the speed to the speed, and we don't have the Z. We don't have this Z here. You see, this Z should appear on the rotors as well. So for the rotors, we also enable Z. I don't know why it's disabled. It's the same problem with my mouse. I'm going to get my mouse. So have that Z there. And now as we continue having a look at I don't know why it's not getting that. If you now have a look at your image. Let's get this back there, and now try to have a look at your main rotor. We still can't see the blur effect because we've not told it to blur in a curved manner, and also it also depends on which frame you are, but that does not play so much part. We want it to blur by 1 at 32 samples, and now you can increase the blur as much as you want it to be. And this is also, let's see it directly here on the viewer. Come on, I only want it to appear there. Someone is messing up with me. Let it have there. So after you do that, the reason why it doesn't appear is because we have not rendered that out, so you should re-render that. I'm not anyway going to keep on rendering because of the length of my tutorial, but when you render, you give it a render, it's going now to pick on this vector blur. I want to give it a final render when I have now done the editing, or I have done the compositing for the lights, because now for the lights we want them to have a glow effect and a glare effect combined, and because of that we will start by adding some blur, some fast Gaussian blur. So select this to be fast Gaussian, and then here you can have 25 by 25. So this is going to help us have that blur for the light. You can see that it's already start taking effect. That is for the blur. We have blurred that, and then I think we should also be seeing the same effect at the back here. After we do that, we are also going to add a glare node to glare those lights. So take that streaks, and depending on how you want them to be, I like them being low. I don't know whether you should use streaks. Mainly streaks appear, they don't appear everywhere. Don't think that having streaks everywhere will be practical, but I find them cool. Let's have them with maybe five or even 6 iterations, and then we don't want them to have so much, so you can reduce, is it reduce or increase the threshold? Let's see, if you get it to 0.5, they become longer. I don't want them to be longer, I want them to be shorter. Just some small streaks there, and that should work fine. So actually, even before we add the streaks, we should also duplicate that node here, and what it's going to do, this one will now become the fog glow. Yeah, so it's going to give us that glow effect, and now the threshold is going to be 0.8, something like 0.8. Yeah, now that gets really to where we want it to be. So for the lights, you can see it's fine. For the vector blur, we are waiting to re-render that. For the body, we can actually we can do some color correction, but I think the color correction for the entire render should I'm not going to do the correction between these two nodes, but I'm going to correct it right at this point. So we are going to have the color and the color balance, which now should, let me expand these nodes. You can see now we are trying to get our helicopter to fit a theme. Sometimes I find battle themes, they use orange to yellow colors. Probably have this war in a war scene, okay, and now you want to show there's a lot of war. You can have that color between red to brown to yellow, it works fine. If it's for sci-fi theme, you should go for a bluish color, perhaps. Yeah, that works with sci-fi. For war and that stuff of action movies, they use that reddish brown and close to yellow. You can try to do some of the compositing, but remember, just don't go around, hovering over colors here. Have an idea, or have what you want to show in this. So I think I want to emphasize the color of the body, and let me just have it close enough to that. Don't again come and overpower it with color. You're going to lose so much of the detail. That is, this one we collect the entire picture, not picture but image, or whatever you call it, is going to affect the whole of it. So that's why you have our node setup. So after you've collected that, you also want to probably brightness and contrast. Oh, not that, but RGB curves. Now this one, you can use them to increase, to brighten up the image, the entire image. Okay, so if I select that, you are going to brighten, to make your render very bright or very dark, depending on the time of the day. For example, you can just pick it so well, depending on the time of the day we have there. If it's during the bright day, you have that. So for me, I like us to go with just a small adjustment to the, and then you can always pick on these channels. For example, you want, to reduce the brightness, or the brightness of the bright areas. You have bright areas on this. If you want to reduce them, or for example, reduce the brightness of the colors, like now the red channel, you can increase the red channel, and everywhere we have red. What did I just do? Everywhere you have red, anything red will increase the brightness, but this can as well damage your render, your nice cool render. So take care so much on this. I just work with the compositing. This, I don't know what C stands for, but work with that layer. It just works well. Don't worry with the rest. For me, I think our helicopter is good to go. There's something else I like doing to my renders, and that is the final thing about giving it a depth of field. This what means a depth of field is that anything close to the camera will be very clear. Everything far away from the camera is going to be very dull, and by dull I mean it's going to lose focus. It's a principle or a property called the depth of field, and here we want it to affect the main mesh, not the main but the entire render of our helicopter. So we want it to come before this color correction, so that the color correction can can actually affect the depth of field. We are going to use a depth of field, and this is found at the filter where we use the defocus node. Yeah, we are going to use that defocus node. And now this defocus node, because it's actually affecting everything else, including these other layers, if we only had this layer, it would just be a matter of plugging in that Z. Okay, and now after you plug in that Z, you can see everything became blurry, and that's because of the settings we have here. Let's reduce the maximum blur, for example, to 11, and now you can see after we reduce that, it's actually giving us, or even let's reduce that, for example, to 5. It's making our image clearer and clearer and clearer. Let's increase now this to 10 and see the effect, the threshold, or the place where it should start, and now increase this. Let's have that in. Yeah, so you can see now what we are speaking about. We are telling the camera everything that is far away, let it be blurry, and everything that's very close to the camera, let it be very clear. Let's reduce this threshold, the place where it should the place where the effect should start, the distance between the camera and the object. So for that threshold, I'm finding 8 should be working correctly, and then reduce this maximum blur for that to let's get 11. We don't also want them to blur it so much, but the good thing with it, it helps to emphasize the size of this helicopter, because it's a big helicopter weighing 15 tons. That's from a documentary I watched about the EH-101. Now, I don't know, I didn't think that it was supposed to affect the blur of this rotor, and I don't know why it really affected, because I thought we should now go ahead and combine. We should combine these two together. I think we should have combined them with a math. So let's see. We should actually use we should combine. Let's see. Or just leave it. Just leave it. Because it's working, let's leave it. In fact, there's that proverb, it's already working, why fix it? And that is it. That makes our tutorial. We have our node setup, and now the last thing is now to plug this to the compositing and watch the magic happen here below. Boom, here it is. Now I think the only final thing I'm now supposed to do, as I had promised, is to do the final render of this helicopter. And now pause. We are back now for the final part, and this is the awesome render we got after rendering, and now you see it updated the vector blur. The only thing, however, I missed out to do, I don't know whether I checked this curved. I think we should check the curved part there. We blurred too much. We should not blur it too much. It's going to lose the detail we want. So you can try to reduce that blur and increase the samples to probably 100. You can have as many samples as you have. Although it increases the render time, it's very essential in giving you a very clean render, and also a very believable render that's fine looking. Let's have it at the compositing, and I think it's fine. And now you have your helicopter blurring there in a very nice way. There's something else we usually do for the rotor, although this one I realized later after I had already finished this tutorial. You can increase the multiple important sample here. We have the sampled motion blur. You can check this, increase these samples, and now this one has the effect of increasing the render time by a very huge amount. That's why I skipped it in the first place. But if you have the time to wait, it actually makes it better to have this selected, then re-render that, and it's going to update that. Let me not go into that extent, because our tutorial is getting very wrong, and I don't want that to happen. There's something else I figured out as now I close. I was trying to show you how you can combine the Z passes. If you want to use the Z pass from here and here to affect this defocus node, because apparently on this layer we have the rotors, on this layer we have the lights. We want to tell the camera also to follow the defocus node for those layers as well, and you can see we've only used the Z channel to defocus that. So to combine the Z channels from these two and later combine them together, all of them to enter into the defocus as one, we use a math node, converter math, And now here you can see it has two inputs here, so you can actually take this Z channel to the top and this Z channel here to the bottom. Then you can tell it to add those together, and then after it adds those together, you will add another, and let me first deselect this to reduce on how Blender is working, because apparently it's dragging a lot. Let me have these nodes, all of them, move to the right, apart from this guy, this math node. We are going to duplicate our math node, and now take that channel to the bottom. Let me have it there, and then now take this Z channel from here and now add it to the top of that one. So we add all those three Z channels and now plug them in here to our defocus. We actually left the defocus behind, and that's not what it's supposed to do. It should follow nicely with those. We should actually scale X0, and then you scale in the Y. So you have those now being plugged at that Z, like that. And now let's see the effect. It might blur it a lot because we have added and added and added and added. I don't know, I should try maybe to multiply. I don't know whether multiply will be the one that works, but now this is a matter of just testing them. Just test which one works. I think even we can just add. After we add, we can now come and try to once again probably increase this defocus node so that it now fits the new. It fits the new, and you can see now it's slowly picking up. If for example we go by 20, we can now see how the effect is going to be. I'm feeling a bit tired. I don't know why. I've not recorded such a long tutorial, and I hope it has been much of help to you. The best thing with compositing is that there's no formula about doing it. It depends on what you want in the first place. Maybe you can try to reduce this maybe to 5. You first work from extreme figures and then you continue reducing or increasing them depending on what you're doing. So I should increase this now. Let's for example go to 20. You keep observing, and after you observe, you can make changes as you go on now. Yeah, you can see now the effect has now started picking shape, but only if now we work out on this. Now we reduce how much blur we are going to get for that distance. So you see, if we reduce that figure, it becomes even much more blurred. So let's use 9. You can just try to zoom out to organize your scene. You can try 9 and now see which blurs and which does not blur. Probably 9 even is too much because even the mineral is almost disappearing. And you can even go to, it's actually 9 is little. Let's try even 15, and that should, I think that should work out well. 15 should work out well. So later, the tutorial I'm now going to make is, I realized that by using these alpha over nodes to combine render layers, there is this line that because of using masking, the two render layers don't get into don't actually transcend into each other nicely. They sometimes leave a very sharp mark there, although that one can be solved by anti-aliasing by increasing these figures, but still, even after doing that, it still leaves a very sharp line. That's very irritating. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you that how. So thank you very much for being with me. My name is Mwaura. If you like my tutorial, let me know in the comments below, and have a nice time. Also, if you follow my tutorial and you make anything good out of it, I'll be very grateful to see too, and may God bless you.